Well, good evening, everyone. My name is John Switzer, and I have the privilege of being the upper school principal here at Frankfurt International School. And we're in for a treat tonight. So I have two moderators to my right, Ted Hutter and Vama Kotari, 12th grade and 10th grade. And they're going to play a special role in this evening's event. So we have with us virtually Professor Jonathan Haidt, who is a NYU professor at the Stern School of Business and the author of a much acclaimed book. I think many of us have read it. We've certainly all heard about it, The Anxious Generation. Last time I looked, it was 45 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. And I think for a reason, because he struck a nerve and a chord with a lot of us around the use of phones in our childhood. So what we're going to do is have about a 35 minute presentation from Professor Haidt, followed by a 25 minute Q&A with our two moderators to my right, and we'll see how it goes. I'm really fortunate to say we have over 1,200 people registered online watching this in over 46 different countries. The countries on the map are where we have people watching from, especially I think here in Germany, Switzerland, Europe is well represented, but it is really 46 different countries. So for all of you watching around the world, whether you're a teacher, an administrator, a parent, or even a student, I want to welcome you this evening and welcome Professor Jonathan Haidt. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to speak with you. What we're trying to do here is very difficult. We're trying to change norms about childhood and change the tech ecosystem around children. And it seems like an impossible task when you're just one parent trying to do it and nobody else is doing it. Or if you're one school trying to do it and nobody else is doing it. But what I found and what I wrote the book about is how we're stuck in this collective action trap. It's hard as individuals, but when we work together and then everybody can see that everyone agrees there's a problem and everyone is doing the same norms, then we can actually escape very quickly, as is happening around the world. And so whenever I can speak to an organization of schools, a few hours ago I spoke to an organization of 300 religious schools in the state of Wisconsin. So if I can speak to many of you scattered around the world, around Europe and other parts, I know that you'll be talking to each other, you'll be supporting each other, and then whatever you do in your schools will be noticed by other schools in the communities that you're in, and that's how we roll back the phone-based childhood. And I think we can do it very, very quickly. So I'm very excited to talk with you. I'll be telling you about my research. I'm very confident about the trends in all of the English-speaking countries, and I have some good data from Europe. But the international story, especially about the decline of play, is much more variable. However, in all of our countries, most of our kids are on phones and social media much of the day. So let's talk about that. So here's my topic for today. And I want to begin with a metaphor. Think about the way that tree roots grow. They grow out very slowly. Their genes don't tell them where to grow. Rather, they sort of feel out the environment. And as you can see here, this particular tree, it was able to feel out where the water is, where the cracks are, and the roots grew along those cracks. Trees are just amazing things, the way they grow. Here's a tree that grew up behind a 19th century tombstone. I guess the tombstone scratched the bark. The bark then the tree kind of grew around the tombstone. And if you think about human growth as being like that, whether it's neural growth or bone growth, I think you can begin to see the problem. If our young people in the United States, half of all young people, all teenagers, I should say that they are online almost constantly. So this is something like 9, 10, 11 hours a day. If you're holding your phone in your hand 9, 10, 11 hours a day, there's a TikTok craze about people looking at their fingers, and what they find is their phone hand, the pinky is bent and it's not symmetrical with the other hand. Now that I don't know if that's just a TikTok craze, but the medical community is finding that there's a big rise in neck and joint and pinky pains because our bodies are in a sense growing around this. They weren't meant to be in these postures, but we spend a lot of time in these postures. Same thing for our eyes. Our eyes evolved in an outdoor world for hunting and gathering. And when children's eyes are growing, what's happening now around the world is that they're too long. The focal point is no longer on the retina. children are developing myopia in which the eye is elongated, and it would be easily cured if kids would get a little bit of time outside every day, long views, sunlight. But when you spend most of your time looking at a screen up close, your eye doesn't grow right. Same with like those roots that I showed you; they grow in a different way. So this is an actual photo of a Gen Z brain that I generated using AI. Okay, it's not actual, but my point is that I think what's been happening since 2012, roughly, is that people who go through puberty with a smartphone in their hand and a social media account, in a way, not much of a metaphor, their brains are growing around their phones and they're coming out differently. And I see no advantages to it, only disadvantages. So the story that I tell in The Anxious Generation is a tragedy in two acts. In Act One, we lose the play-based childhood, something we've had for literally 300 million years. As long as there have been mammals, there were young mammals playing, and that's how you wire up your brain. We got rid of that in the English-speaking countries between 1990 and 2010. In Scandinavia and Germanic countries, I think they have not, although I hear there's some movement in that direction. We'll talk about that, I hope. In Act Two, the phone-based childhood comes storming in. This, I think, is international. In 2010, as we'll see, very few teens had a smartphone, but by 2015, it was the dominant form. Another way to summarize the book is by saying that we have overprotected our children in the real world, and we have underprotected them online. So I'll cover 5 topics, and then we'll have a discussion. So the first is that this isn't just about mental illness. This is actually very much about education. A year and a half ago, Derek Thompson wrote an amazing article in The Atlantic titled "It Sure Looks Like Phones Are Making Students Dumber." And he points out things like this. In the United States, we have the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, the nation's report card. And what you can see is that we made very slow and steady progress, raising reading and mathematics scores from 1971 through 2012. And this is with various headwinds of declining marriage and other demographic features that are making it harder to raise. But we did it. On average, American kids were better readers and better at math in 2012 than they were in 1971. And then it turns around. Now, when these data came out a little more than a year ago, people freaked out and said, oh my God, look what COVID did. And you can see the COVID effect there. Closing schools and making kids watch computers all day long was a really, really bad idea. But what nobody seemed to notice last year was that the turnaround didn't start in 2020. It started in 2012. It started basically as soon as our kids switched over into the phone-based childhood. And many people thought that there would be a turnaround in 2024. Well, guess what? The results just came in 2 weeks ago, and here they are. Whether we look at reading or math, what we see, and you see this in many data sets, is that when you stratify the results by quartile or any measure, whether in this case this is by performance, so you take the top quarter on performance on these exams, and you can see the blue line on top. The top quarter is down a little bit since 2015. But it's really the bottom quarter that is driving the change. The bottom quarter is down a lot. This is on many data sets, and that's in both reading and math. So whatever's happening, it's hitting the bottom quarter, and that's both whether you measure in terms of academic ability or whether you measure in terms of social class, SES, you find the same thing. And it's not just the United States. It's happening everywhere. So this is the PISA data set. Once again, no real trend before 2010. And then this happens all around the world, or I think there's 35 or so countries in PISA. Students know less now than they did in 2012. So this should be of concern to every single school in the world, as well as every parent in the world. Now let's move on to the mental health crisis. This is where we have the most data and the best data. So I first noticed this, like many college professors, around 2014, 2015. Students coming in were just different. They were different from what they were in 2012. And we thought that they were all millennials. That was our word for people born after 1980. And in 2012, they were all millennials. And these were the rates of various disorders. But beginning around 2013, 2014, we begin getting students that we now know are Gen Z. And the big thing is they had much higher rates, more than twice as high, of psychological disorders, especially anxiety. You can see that here. This is data from American universities aggregated at UCLA. And you see no trend in all of these diagnoses, no trend until 2010. And then when we enter this period, the Great Rewiring period, really 2010 to 2015 is the whole period, we see a really big increase in depression and especially in anxiety. Anxiety is the central disorder of Gen Z. And it's only Gen Z. So when we break up these data, this is now nationally representative data of Americans of all ages. No trend before 2010, and then this happens, but only to Gen Z. Millennials are up too. That's in red. At least recent dots there would be millennials. And I think it's the younger millennials were affected, but not as much as those born after 1995. And like all internalizing disorders, anxiety and depression, there's always a big gender difference. Now here, the relative increase is actually in the same ballpark, but depression is now very, very characteristic of being an American teenage girl. There's a very good chance about a third of our girls have had a major depressive episode in the last year. About 20% of them have seriously considered suicide in the last year. This is just normal now among teenagers, and it was not like this in 2010. Oh, by the way, you can also notice that COVID had an effect, but COVID is not driving it. COVID was a blip. And many people say, oh, this is just self-report data. This is just Gen Z is comfortable talking about it. We should celebrate this. The kids are all right. Don't do a moral panic. But if that was the case, then we wouldn't see the exact same patterns in behavior, but we do. So this is emergency room visits for non-fatal self-harm. And when we enter the Great Rewiring period, it almost triples for the younger teenage girls. And we see the same thing with suicides in the United States. So we always see the biggest increases for 10 to 14-year-old girls and in terms of percentage-wise increase. And all of this is true for the older teens, but I'm showing you the younger teens because whatever it is, it's hitting them the hardest and the most. And we see this increase in suicide. Now, boys have higher rates because when a boy makes an attempt, they tend to use irreversible means, a gun or a building, at least in the United States. And when girls make attempts, they tend to use reversible means. So girls make more attempts, but they end up with fewer dead girls. In any case, the percentage increase is extraordinary for both, but especially for our younger teen girls. And note that in a single year, between 2012 and 2013, the rate went up 67%, and it wasn't just a data error. It wasn't a blip. It was the beginning of an increase to 134%. What happened in 2012, I wonder? And what Zach Roush and I, my research partner, what we found is that we find pretty much the exact same pattern in all of the English-speaking countries. We find it very clearly in Scandinavia. We find it in Europe as a whole, although interesting, not Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is not showing these patterns. That's the one part of the world that we know is getting more religious, and being religious, being rooted in community seems to be protective. But across the Western world, we don't have good data yet on East Asia or South Asia, but across the Western world, this is happening. Briefly, here's the same data from the UK, self-harm from medical records, no trend, nothing happening before 2010. And then 2012, someone flips a light switch and girls start checking into emergency rooms for self-harm. Australia, same story, not quite as sharp an elbow, but still very much the same trend. 81% increase in psychiatric emergency room visits in Australia. And here's data I don't have self-harm data from across Europe, but we have psychological distress based on the HBSC survey with questionnaires. And what we see is no trend before 2010, and then an increase for both sexes, but especially for girls. So we have a global mystery. Why is it that since the early 2010s, young people across the developed world, at least the Western world, are becoming more anxious, depressed, and lonely, more likely to harm and kill themselves, less educated, less able to focus, hence functionally less intelligent? Now, why is this happening in so many countries at the same time? There's only one theory that I've encountered. No one's even offered an alternative. In the United States, people say, oh, well, in 2012, we had our worst ever school shooting. And ever since then, in Connecticut, our students have these terrifying lockdown drills, live shooter drills. And so, of course, they're anxious. Well, the timing fits, it's true. But why did girls in New Zealand and Scandinavia begin checking into psychiatric emergency rooms at the same time? It doesn't make any sense. The only theory out there is this one, that we changed childhood very rapidly and we interfered with human development. So now, why did this happen? So let me go a little deeper into what exactly happened. The way to understand this is that technology always shapes children's experience. Technology has pervasive effects on everything. Television changed societies in ways that we still don't fully understand. And the flip phone, when the flip phone came in, in the late 90s, early 2000s, millennials, when they were those born after 1980, when they were young, they had flip phones. They used them to call each other and they used them to text each other one-on-one. They weren't doing 30-person group calls where they're performing and trying to impress. They were connecting. And so if you were born in 1995, that's the last year of the millennial generation, you are 15 in 2010, which means you're through early puberty. You have a flip phone. You don't have a smartphone. iPhone comes out in 2007, but in 2010, not that many teens had one. And there's no attention economy, at least not in the way that it's about to hit. But if you were born in the year 2000, then you turned 15 in the year 2015. What that means is that when you were going through puberty, you were carrying a thing which, yes, it can be used as a phone, but you didn't do that very much. Rather, you had a supercomputer that allowed everyone in the world to get to you if you were on Snapchat or Instagram. Everyone who wants sex or money from you can get to you. It has a front-facing camera, high-speed internet, unlimited data, unlimited interruptions, constant push notifications. And now there's this massive new attention economy worth, at the time, just hundreds of billions, but now several trillion, all based on monetizing your attention. So that is what I call the great rewiring of childhood. And you can see it if you just think back on what your own childhood was like. Kids used to be out playing. I grew up in the 1970s during a crime wave, but everybody was out playing with other kids. It would be madness if some 9-year-old was not allowed out to play with his friends. Everyone else is out playing. Those who grew up in the 1980s in the United States, you know that you could just ride around town with an extraterrestrial in your basket. You didn't need an adult. You could just, try to save him and save humanity. But by 2015, if you want to play with your friends, if you're a boy, you can't go over to their house because then you can't play with them. You have to go to your house where you have your controller, your screen, and you can control your avatar in a multiplayer video game. And girls, of course, are no longer talking that much on the phone. They're now scrolling and posting and comparing. You can see the great rewiring here in this graph. This is America has very good national surveys that have been running a long time. This is the time use survey. And you can see that the youngest age group, 15 to 24, they used to spend around 120 minutes a day with their friends. This is how many minutes a day do you spend with your friends, not counting school or work, outside of school and work, how much you're hanging out with your friends. So 2 hours a day used to be the average. But then after 2012, it plunges. And note that the 2019 data point was collected in May before COVID was known about. And the 2020 data point was collected in May of 2020 at the peak of COVID lockdowns. And so I want to ask you, do you see the COVID effect? Do you see how COVID accelerated things? If you look at the older generations, all the other bars, you see it. You see the line bending down to the 2020 data point. But when we look at young people, you don't see an increase because they began social distancing in 2012. And as soon as they got their phones, they began social distancing. And by 2019, they were almost done. And in 2020, they just finished the job at the same rate. And even that is grossly exaggerating the time that they're interacting, because even when they're with their friends, a lot of that time is looking at their own phones or sometimes looking at their friend's phone. So there are so many harms. I don't have time to list them all. There's a whole chapter on the foundational harms that are hitting everybody, boys and girls, in a huge way, including social deprivation, which I just showed you. I mean, the opportunity cost is just that since a lot of our kids are on for 7 to 10 hours a day, that kind of pushes out everything else: books, hobbies, eye contact, running around, sunlight, everything. Social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation. And I think this is going to get so much worse as the TikTok generation comes into view. Older Gen Z were not shaped by TikTok. They were shaped by Instagram, which is bad, especially for girls. But TikTok, I think, is much, much worse for the ability to focus and pay attention. So I think we're going to really have to, it'll get worse before it gets better, I believe. There are so many reasons why social media is targeted at girls. It's a trap for girls. It's designed for girls. It's designed to trap girls. Girls end up doing more visual social comparison. They're more prone to social perfectionism. Relational aggression is amplified by social media, whereas boys' aggression is more physical. It's not amplified by social media. It's actually dampened. Um, Girls share emotions more than boys, and so if one girl is anxious and she's posting about it, that's going to influence her friends and even her friends' friends. Whereas for boys, emotions don't spread nearly as much. So for all these reasons, this is why we see such sharp bends in the girls' data around 2012. It's a complete transformation of girls' lives in ways that are inhumane and really incompatible with healthy girl development. For boys, the story is different. Boys are harmed by social media, but it doesn't make them depressed and anxious in quite the same way. The story here is a little longer, and here I draw on Richard Reeves' a wonderful book of Boys and Men. I urge you to read that, especially if you're a boys' school. The basic story that we worked out is that boys have been retreating from the real world. They used to be out playing, doing things, getting jobs. Those jobs often involve manual labor. All that stuff has been declining for boys. At the same time, technology has been rising. The technology is amazing. And as the video games got better and better, boys spent more time on them. As the porn got better and better and high-speed data and more private, because now you have a laptop. Oh, now you have a smartphone. So boys are spending a lot more time on porn. So if we look at girls and boys at the age of 14, what we see is that the girls are more miserable. The girls are really doing terribly. Now, the boys are actually doing terribly, but they're actually having fun because the porn and the video games and the computers are really exciting for them. But I think the way to understand what's happening to boys is this. Boys think of them as being surrounded by fish hooks, and all of these companies are desperately fighting for a boy's attention. They're trying to hook boys on everything they can. So it begins with video games. Now, video games are a lot of fun. Most boys are not harmed by them, but about 10 to 15% do develop habitual use, compulsive use. It damages their family relationships. I think long-term, it's likely to change their brains. So a large minority of boys, I think, are altered by the dopamine, the huge dopamine effects, quick dopamine of video games. That continues on with pornography, and then vaping and marijuana pens and all the addictive substances that are peddled, especially to boys. Then it continues on with sports betting, which is very much like slot machine betting. And then on, when they're young men, into investing, which has been gamified. In all of these ways, these are all designed to give boys quick dopamine, to hook them on your product, to take their attention, to monetize their attention, to take their money. Bankruptcies and complete life failures among boys are rising, and I think they're going to rise even faster in the future. In the United States, we insanely legalize sports betting. Anyone can bet on anything all the time, and boys are doing that. There are age limits, but you can get around them. And our young men are a mess. And so this is going to really be devastating to young men. The saddest graph in the whole book is this one. We have a major national survey that's been running since the 70s. And one item on it is, I feel that my life is not very useful. And the percentage who said yes to that or agree used to be 8 or 9%. But once we get into the Great Rewiring period, it doubles. All of a sudden, almost instantly, our young people begin to feel that their life is not very useful, because it's not. Our young people's lives really are not very useful. All they're doing is consuming content. If you're consuming content all day long and someone asks you, is your life useful? The answer is no, and you're correct. So that's my story about what the Great Rewiring was and why it's been so devastating. Now, just a little bit about EdTech, because I imagine many of your schools are giving computers and tablets to kids. I think this is a huge mistake. Just to level set here, I teach courses here at New York University. I have an undergrad course called Flourishing, and I have a graduate version, an MBA version called Work, Wisdom, and Happiness. And I used to let my students use laptops or tablets because I like to take notes on a laptop, and I would explain, you can't multitask, it's distracting. But if you stand up and raise your right hand and say this out loud, you can use your computer. So I used to make them pledge that they'd only do it for class-related purposes. But the TA would sit in the back of the room and she'd tell me, John, they're texting, they're online shopping, they're checking their LinkedIn page, their Instagram feed. And so just before COVID, I changed my policy and I said, no more. No more. No screens of any kind. No one can use a screen at all. And at first they were a little wary, but a few weeks in, I check with them at the end of every semester. They love it. They realize, oh yeah, this is what it's like to actually pay attention to a class. We're paying a lot of money for this class. How about we actually pay attention to it? So this is my policy now. None at all. Obviously, if someone has a need for an accommodation, a medical issue, a learning issue, but no one has ever asked for it in the 4 or 5 years I've been doing this. No one has ever asked for this accommodation. At the same time this was all happening, in the early 2010s, Google made a successful move to take over American education, and they've stuffed our schools full of cheap or free computers, and then they make their money not on the computer, they make it on the services, the network services that are sold to the school. It was a complete gold rush for educational technology companies, and they were promoting the idea that the more technology you give kids, the more they're going to learn. The technology is great. Let's get them ready for the modern technological world. But why is it then that at the same time that our schools were getting stuffed full of ed tech in the early to mid 2010s, scores were falling across the country and around the world? UNESCO put out a big report about a year and a half ago, where they call time on it. They say, wait a second, there's not much evidence that this stuff is helping, and there's evidence of harm. They say student use of these devices beyond a moderate threshold may have a negative impact on academic performance. The decline is mostly linked to increased distraction and time spent on non-academic activities. That's exactly what my undergrads do when they have a computer. That's exactly what my MBA students do when they have a computer. If you want your students to learn, don't give them a computer. Make sure that they do not have any kind of computer or multi-purpose device on their desk during class time. The report also says, meanwhile, the excessive use of digital devices has potential harmful effects on physical and mental health. So we're really hurting our students in so many ways because of this technology. And again, we're hurting the most vulnerable students the most. We're hurting the weakest students the most. Sweden was ahead of the game in digitizing. They moved very quickly to move everything online. And so they also were very quick to realize, whoa, this was a terrible mistake, and they're leaving it. There's clear scientific evidence that digital tools impair rather than enhance student learning. Sweden is backing away from this, and I think we all should. Now, what then, more specifically, what then should you do? The book, I hope many of you read the book. The book argues that we're stuck in these collective action traps, but if we do these 4 things together, we break out of the trap, we roll back the phone-based childhood. And so I want, in your schools, I want you all to be aware of these and to support them. Only 2 of them are really about schools, but you can help promote the norms everywhere, at home as well. So the first is no smartphone before high school. Many parents have seen, they give their kid any kind of smart device, a touch screen, much more so than a laptop. Touch screens are like B.F. Skinner in a box. They train you with stimulus response reinforcement, stimulus response reinforcement. And when you give your kid one of these devices, there's a good chance it's going to move to the center of their life, and you're going to make eye contact with them a lot less for the rest of their childhood. So don't give, and also please don't give your kids iPads either. It's very much the same. Sure, on a long car ride, they can use your iPad to watch a movie. That's no problem. But the idea of a kid with a touchscreen device that they have ready access to at home or while walking around the world is, I think, a very bad idea. Second norm, no social media before 16. Social media is wildly inappropriate. It was engineered to be addictive to adolescents. That was the goal. They studied brain chemistry. They took a course. Some of them took a course at Stanford called persuasive technology, basically how to addict people using technology. They studied slot machine gambling. Why would we let them have our kids? Why would we let them put our kids into contact with strange men around the world? It's completely insane. Snapchat gets 10,000 reports of sextortion, not a year, a month. So it's complete madness that we have kids on social media. I mean, we need to think of this more like driving or smoking or drinking or heroin or something like that. Third is phone-free schools. This is a must. All schools must go phone-free. And I just want to make a point about that, which is that, first of all, almost all teachers hate the phones. If there's no teacher wants to have to fight with YouTube for the student's attention during class. So teachers overwhelmingly favor supporting cell phones during the entire school day, and here's why. This NEA survey found, they asked, how disruptive is student use of cell phones during instructional time for you? And they broke it up by the kind of policy at the school. The worst possible policy is no policy. Oh, we let each teacher decide. Oh, we're not going to tell them how to run their class. No, that's horrible, because now it's very hard for one teacher to be the bad guy. And a lot of them, they just give up. And then, as my students tell me in New York City public schools, you just hide it in your desk, you sit in the back row, you put it in a book, and everyone, not everybody, a lot of kids are on their phones all during class. Well, what about saying no? We ban it during class time. We make them put it in a little phone cubby in the front. Then they get it after class. That's also terrible. That's used between classes, because then that guarantees that they'll be on their phone in between classes. The drama continues. They come into the next class. They're thinking about the drama. During class, it's hard to forget the drama. And then 10 minutes before class ends, they're thinking about getting their phone back. So that classroom ban only is a bad policy. Some schools tell me it makes things better. It's better than nothing. But the only policy that is good is one where you separate the kids from their phones, either in a locked pouch, a yonder pouch, or a phone locker. Or it can be as simple as each kid decorates a padded manila envelope with their name and artwork. And then in the morning, they put their phone in that envelope, and that envelope sits in a milk crate at the front of the classroom, homeroom, or whatever class they go to first. That's where they keep the phone. So you can do this for no money. And that policy works wonders. Schools that implement a phone-free policy almost always say the same thing, which is, we hear laughter in the hallways again. We hear more laughter at lunch. Things are loud because kids are talking to each other, laughing and having fun. And the fourth norm is far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. I co-founded an organization called Let Grow. I urge you to go to letgrow.org. And especially, please see our most important program. We've developed this incredible program called the Let Grow Experience. It's so simple. All you do is you give the kids a piece of paper, they take it home. Their job is to find something they can do with their parents' permission, but without their parents. And for example, maybe you're 8 years old, you've never walked your dog before alone. You've only done it with your dad. Well, you think you can walk the dog? Try it. Maybe you've never walked to maybe there's a corner store or grocery store a quarter mile away. You think you can walk there and buy a quart of milk? Try it. And amazing things happen. The kids, they're jumping up and down with excitement. They grow in confidence so quickly. But the really magical thing about, there's two magical things. One is that parents are afraid. I mean, at least in the English-speaking countries, parents are just really afraid that if they ever take their eyes off their child, the kid's going to be abducted or run over by a car or something like that. And so when the kid's 8, 9, 10, they're thinking, well, what age should I let them out? How about never? How about not now? How about I don't know? But if the school is saying to all the third graders, all the 8-year-olds, let's say, here, go home and do this project. And then you see 8-year-olds all over town. Suddenly people see 8-year-old kids walking to the supermarket and getting a quart of milk and paying for it at the cashier. And you realize, wait a second, we all did that when we were 8. All of us older people, that was just the norm, was you're out in the world by the age of 8. We can do that again. So it has transformative effects, not just on the kids, but on the community and on the parents. The parents realize, oh, wait, I can take my eyes off my kid, and actually, it's pretty great. And the kid loves it, and I'm proud of her. So that's the 4 norms. That's the sort of the basic that we have to do around the world. And I'm thrilled that so many countries are acting. Australia has raised the age to 16, effective in December, and they require that the tech companies have to do the age verification, just as we do for every other harmful consumer product. But I want to add a 5th norm now, since I'm talking to international schools, which is, okay, what do you do about all this technology? And I think the norm is delay and reduce. And I would add on no one-to-one laptops. In America, we say one-to-one. The goal for the last 15 years was every child should have their own computer or tablet. No, don't do that. Get rid of all the one-to-one stuff. As for the other stuff, like having laptops that you can bring out, delay and reduce. So we're creating a Google document. If you go to anxiousgeneration.com/reviews, we have like more than a dozen Google documents that review all the research we can find, like on gambling and dating apps and porn and, all the different activities that are affecting kids. So we have a new one on educational technology. You'll find it at anxiousgeneration.com/reviews. We'll have a Substack post about that very soon that will walk you through it. But here's what I would summarize what we're finding in the document. EdTech has been foisted upon us with very little evidence of benefit. There was never much evidence to support this. What evidence there was often paid for or actually conducted by the EdTech companies themselves. So in terms of published high quality academic work, this was just pushed onto us without much evidence of that it works. And there's growing evidence of harm, as you see. The UNESCO report really summarized, from around the world. It's clear this stuff is really hurting our kids. So the only proper stance to all of these educational technologies is skepticism. Assume that they are guilty until proven innocent. Now, Khan Academy is wonderful, and if there was a device that only did Khan Academy and nothing else, you could not do anything else on it, I think that would be a pretty useful thing to have to help the kids who need, the kids who are way behind, the kids who are way ahead. But a multifunction device, no, I think the harm there is just vastly outweighs any possible benefit. So delay, that means try to get it all out of elementary school, the lower grade, try to get it all out of those. Now, the teacher can use a computer and a screen to display things. I don't see any harm. Haven't seen research on that, but it seems likely to me that the teacher having a computer, the ability to show all kinds of things to this class, I think that sounds really good. That probably is fine and good. It's really the one-to-one devices that we have to eliminate. Reduce all the technology, especially in the younger grades. Back to basics, follow Sweden. And the third is align. So sometimes there might be a very good pedagogical reason to use some technology. What happened in America was the devices were often given for free. The administrators would push the teachers, just use it, find a way to use it. Just, use this, we'll get more of them. And that was, I think, a huge, huge mistake. So that's my point about the fifth norm, delay and reduce EdTech. And so in conclusion, it sure looks like phones are making students dumber. And so I urge you to go to anxiousgeneration.com. If you then click on the button in the upper right, Take Action, what you'll see is a drop-down menu. We have resources for parents, educators, Gen Z, legislators. And under educators, we have an educator action guide going through some of the simplest, most important things you can do. We have ways that parents can get involved in petitioning a school or pushing a school to go phone free. We have a lot of people who can speak at your school, either in person or remotely. I don't know if we have many speakers in Europe, but certainly we have lots of people who could give remote talks. A lot of my talks are online. I now have a YouTube channel. So if you want to have a discussion group of the book, you could show one of my talks or this one. This talk is being recorded, I believe, and it will be made available to anyone who wants to use it. And finally, I hope you'll sign up for afterbabel.com. That's a Substack I run with Zach Roush. And we have all kinds of amazing people writing for it. So many people want to contribute to this. And we have a whole tab for what schools and educators can do. So we have some posts on educational technology and education more generally. So in conclusion, I think that young people's brains have been almost literally growing around their phones, the way this tree has grown around this tombstone. We've got to stop. We've got to roll back the phone-based childhood.
Thank you, Dr. Haidt, for your insightful presentation. Your perspective on smartphone use and its impact on students has given us all a lot to think about. As Dr. Switzer mentioned, my name is Ted Hutter, and I'm a grade 10 student here at FIS.
Hi, my name is Vama Kotari, and I'm a grade 12 student here at FIS.
Nice to meet you, Ted and Valma. How wonderful that we have students leading the discussion. Love it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We'll be moderating the next section of the discussion. We've asked people online to submit questions ahead of time. Dr. Haidt, are you okay with us asking you some of these questions now?
Oh, absolutely. Please go ahead. And I would also want to ask the two of you, as members of Gen Z, as members of the community that I'm talking about, do either of you think I got anything wrong? Please say so. If you think I got part of the story wrong, if you think I've misunderstood your generation, please tell me. What do you think?
We'd actually like to ask a question to you coming from us and also from the student body.
Okay.
You have encouraged the banning of phones and screens in an environment where we as students are learning crucial life skills such as time management, organization, and especially when it comes to studying schoolwork. And these are undoubtedly skills we will use into our future. If phones are banned to reduce distractions, how do we teach students to manage their own screen time responsibly in the real world where phones are generally unavoidable?
Oh, goodness. Thank you for that question. I teach university students, and if I could make one wish to make my students ready for this technological world, it would be keep them the hell off of smartphones and social media until they're at least 16 and maybe even 18. Because when students come here without the ability to pay attention, with a very severe device addiction, my students tell me things like, I try to read a book, I read one sentence, I get bored, I switch to TikTok. So I don't buy the argument that in order to prepare for something as an adult, you need to do it as a child. If we believe that, we would say, look, people are going to be having sex eventually. Let's start them at age 8. I mean, it's going to be all around them. They need to learn. Like, no, that's not the right way to think. There are developmental windows. And in early puberty is the worst possible time to give your brain over to a $1 trillion company that made its $1 trillion by monetizing your attention for other people's benefit. So if we kept, put it this way, talk to any employer today. And if you offer them 2 candidates and you say, one of them had a play-based childhood. They had no technology until they were 18, and they're now 21. The other one has been on TikTok and Instagram since she was 11. She knows how to use TikTok and Instagram. Which one do you want to employ? And I guarantee you, almost all of them are going to say, oh my God, give me the one who was not on the devices, because that person will be able to focus, they'll be able to work, they're not going to have the emotional problems of the kid who was raised on Instagram.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haidt. Before we move on to the first question, I think I will answer your question.
Okay.
Students in our generation definitely see the negative impacts that phones have on our lives, short attention span, and generally being distracted by some unnecessary and harmful things as you've outlined. But we also need or use phones in our daily lives. We have kind of entangled them in everything we do, and so completely banning them and removing them from our lives is a very difficult process and can affect some of our day-to-day activities, and it can be harmful as well in our lives. But we understand the research you've proposed, and therefore we would like to ask some questions by adults and students too. So the first one is from a parent in Munich International School. They asked, some experts like UK cyber psychologist Dr. Elaine Casmet argue that there's little connection between tech use and mental health, citing studies like the 2021 Oxford Internet Institute research. She suggests that schools should avoid banning phones without fully consulting students. What is your take on these studies, and do you think students would ever actually support a phone ban if given the choice?
Great, thanks. There's a lot in there. So first, to your original comment that your lives are entangled with the phones. Yes, that's true. Everyone's life used to be entangled with cigarettes. There were ashtrays and smoking sections everywhere. But we disentangled because we saw the data. Cigarettes kill. And we did it. It was hard, but we did it. Much of what you're concerned about is the ability to connect with your friends. Have a flip phone. I don't care if you text your friends. I want you to call your friends. My daughter was on a FaceTime call with a friend of hers last night. That's wonderful. They were laughing. They were talking. That's great. Do you really need constant access, even in the bathroom, to your Instagram account? No, you don't. You don't. And if you really need it, you can use it on your computer on the weekends. So that's the first thing. We're not talking about banning technology. We're saying you can have a phone. Just you shouldn't have a supercomputer with you all the time. We adults shouldn't do it. We can't deal with it. We're distracted. That's the first thing. And then the next thing was, people who say that there's no evidence of harm. What's been extraordinary about my book is that there's been almost no pushback. That is, all the things I said about childhood, no objection. All the things I said about adolescence, puberty, play, sleep, all of those, there's no objection. There is an academic debate with that professor at Oxford in particular and a few others about whether social media is a cause of these problems or whether it's just a correlate. And some people say, it's just a correlate, and the kids who are really depressed, they're the ones who use social media more. But this is not true. There are at least 7 different kinds of evidence that the phone-based childhood, not just social media, but the phone-based childhood is causing mental illness. Very briefly, the kids themselves say it, and you just said yourself, you all see it. Gen Z is not in denial. You guys see the problem. So the fact that you see it, whereas when I was a kid, we loved television, and our parents said, get off the TV. And we love it. But you see the problems. Your parents see the problems. Surveys of parents see the problems. Teachers see the problems. Psychotherapists see the problems. We have a Substack post today about that at After Babel. So everyone who works with kids and the kids think that this is causing it. We have a lot of eyewitness testimony. And guess what? The academic research actually supports it too. There is a group of experiments where you ask people to get off social media, and what you find is that if they stay off for more than a week, their mental health improves. Whereas if they stay off for just a day or two, it gets worse, because if you're addicted to something and you quit for a day, you don't feel better. And so there was a study that merged all these studies together and concluded that there's no benefit. But when you separate it by duration, you find actually the experiments show benefit if it goes more than a week. So when you have correlational studies, you have experimental studies, you have eyewitness testimony, like what else do I have to do to prove causality? How about signed statement of confession from the perpetrators? We have that. We have a post. TikTok is harming children at an industrial scale. Just using quotes from company employees, we can show they know what they're doing. They're harming kids by the millions. They admit it. Well, not publicly, but we have their internal correspondence. So I think there's a lot of evidence of harm here.
Thank you. We'd like to move on to some questions from the community. These are questions from a parent here at FIS with children both in the primary and elementary school. For one, they would like to ask, what about families? What should they in their family prioritize, and families in general with kids in school? What should they prioritize?
So all over the world, family life has become a fight over screen time. Not 100% of families, but I'd say 80 to 90%. We're all having these similar problems. Once you start allowing, you try to put on rules, you're always getting in arguments over, well, this is a special case, well, this is a different technology, well, this, that. So I really urge everyone to start as early as possible. I did a good job keeping my kids off social media until the age of 16. My daughter's 15 now, and she still doesn't have any. And I focused on that. But what I didn't do, and what I wish I'd done, and here's my main piece of advice to families, especially with young children, implement a policy in your house. No screens in the bedroom ever. That's what it used to be when I was growing up. Nobody would let their kid have a TV in their bedroom because they'd watch it all the time. No screens in the bedroom ever. You can watch movies out in the living room. You can use the computer that's in the kitchen, but you never take a screen into your bedroom. Now, at a certain point, 10, 11, 12, there's going to be so much homework. You're probably going to then say, okay, you can take a laptop in for 2 hours or whatever. But start with just set the norm that screens don't belong in bedrooms, because if you have a kid and a screen and a closed door, a lot of them, not all, but more than 10%, are going to basically just lie on their side and become addicted like a slot machine gambler. We've all seen this. If not in our own kids, we've seen it in our nephews and nieces or our friends' kids. So start early, think about all the screens. But the main thing is, don't just focus on the screens. Focus on giving your kids a fun and exciting childhood. This all gets so much easier when you're not just saying, I'm taking away the screens, but rather I'm saying, go out and play. I've talked with the parents of your two best friends, and what we're going to do is every Friday, you guys are just going to get together. You can go to anyone's house, go around by yourselves if it's possible logistically, but focus on giving young people a fun childhood with each other. Most people talk to older people. One of the most fun things they remember is just hanging out with their friends. Whereas your grade, your generation, you don't get to spend that much time hanging out with friends. You spend a lot of time connecting in ways that are not healthy. They're display related.
Thank you. Shifting gears here a little bit. Now that we better understand the risks of digital tech, what should we be thinking about for the future, especially with AI and the advent of AI in schools?
Mm-hmm. So the main problem, or one of the main problems here, is the distraction effects. These things are just so amazingly gripping. And when I was young, television screens would attract kids, but a touch screen attracts kids much more because it's interactive. It's brighter colors, you hold it in your hand, and you get stimulus response, stimulus response. So we have to change that. Everything that is distracting about our digital lives is going to get much more powerful once AI comes in. So the porn is going to get far more erotic and gripping for boys. The video games are going to get far more exciting and enticing. We're going to lose a lot of boys who are just going to basically consume porn and video games and never amount to anything. And that would be a global tragedy if we lose 10, 20% of our boys. So AI is going to be really devastating for boys. AI companions we're already seeing it's insane that we're letting AI companions become friends of children. We had a case in the US of a boy who was in love with his AI companion, and she said something about, come meet me on this side. And he found his stepfather's gun, he killed himself. But the transcript shows, I mean, the AI, they're not supposed to talk sexy, but they do. And they're not supposed to encourage you to kill yourself, but they do. So I want to establish the principle this year in 2025. Children are not adults. If adults want to choose to use an untested technology, if adults want to fall in love with an AI sex bot, that's their choice. At least in America, we're very libertarian. We let adults make their decisions. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let these companies push this stuff on my kids. It's not tested. It appears to be harmful. Any other consumer product that had this level of harm, the people would have been sued out of existence. But in America, they have sort of somehow or other, they have protection from lawsuits.
Thank you, Dr. Haidt. Moving beyond phones, a parent and teacher at the primary school here at FAS asked, when should schools start supporting younger students, specifically ages 2 to 7, when it comes to screens and technology usage?
Maybe around age 8. So I don't see any role. So first of all, that I didn't delve as deeply into the literature on the first 5 years, but everything I've seen shows at least very clear correlations. When 2, 3, 4-year-olds, the more time they're spending on screens, the more they have developmental delays, speech delays. I'm now hearing many more reports of kids showing up for kindergarten, age 4 or 5, who are not potty trained, who are still in diapers. So growing up on screens instead of moving around the world and interacting with people seems to retard development. And so I think there's really no role for screens in the first few years. Now, if a kid is 4 or 5 and you want to give them 30 minutes of cartoons a day, like one story that's 30 minutes long, at least they pay attention to that for 30 minutes. So I'm not saying 0, but I think in school 0. I don't think there's any use for screens in schools. Now, again, showing a story on a screen that everyone is watching at the same time, maybe there's a role for that by age 6 or 7, but not 2, 3, or 4. Individual screens where a child is watching by themselves, I don't think that should be happening at all in school until at least 10 or 15.
Thank you. We now have a question from a parent at Zurich International School. A lot of students who were in middle school during the COVID-19 pandemic missed out on normal social development because they were online so much. What are some ways that schools can help them catch up and feel more comfortable in social situations?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is my kids' generation. My daughter was in 5th grade. My son was in 8th grade when COVID hit, and they missed out on crucial parts of puberty. And they missed out on face-to-face interaction. And in New York City, for years after COVID, even like a year or 2 ago, kids were still wearing masks. It was crazy. And so there are developmental delays that were made worse by COVID. But I teach a course at NYU. My as I said, my undergraduates, it's the flourishing class. They're 19 years old, and they make amazing progress when they regain control of their attention. That's the first thing. You have to regain control of your attention. So you have to do an audit of what are you doing all day long. And if you're spending a lot of time on your phone, especially social media, you got to cut that way back. Let's see. Your question specifically was about what schools can do to support. Oh, so the best thing you could possibly do for years of students that missed out on social interaction is get the phones and the screens the hell out of class and the school day, because an amazing thing happens when a school goes phone free is that, as I said, you hear laughter in the hallways, the kids are looking at each other, they're looking at the teacher, they're talking to each other. So schools can really make up for the COVID devastation, but if they allow kids to have phones and screens, then they're just extending the damage.
Thank you, Dr. Haidt. I think this will be our last question. This one is from a parent here at FIS, and they asked, how do parents' phone use around their kids affect them? Do you have any advice for families who want to create healthier habits? A book that's getting a lot of attention right now is How to Break Up with Your Phone. What do you think of the ideas in it?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's by a wonderful author named Catherine Price, who is actually working with me. She's part of the Anxious Generation team, and she and I are actually writing a book, which will be a young person's version of the Anxious Generation, and it will be out in November. So I love Catherine. Her book, How to Break Up with Your Phone, is great for adults. most of us feel that we're being fragmented. Our brain, we had normal puberty, our brains developed the ability to pay attention, but we feel now it's just too much stuff coming in. It's overwhelming. Life is not fun. It's just there's too much entertainment, too much news, too many interruptions coming in. So a lot of us have to regulate it. And Catherine's book is very helpful for that. As for whether our kids are copying us, I think parents may overestimate the degree to which their kids are going to copy them. If I start reading The Economist magazine, I guarantee you my daughter is not going to then want to read The Economist magazine. But so I wouldn't say that the kids are copying their parents' behavior. They're copying other kids' behavior. That's what they really care about. But with that said, especially when your kids are younger, a lot of us do what's called continuous partial attention. We have so much stuff coming in, and we have a 2-year-old, and we have to make dinner, and we're doing all this stuff, and we periodically acknowledge the kid. Oh, yes, yes, the puppy, yes, yes, and oh, what does the dog say? That's continuous partial attention. It's bad for everyone. And so I would say when you're with your child, be really with them, make eye contact, don't be switching away. That will block their developing mental model of how to interact with an attachment figure. Your attachment figure is unreliable. You're teaching them. So when you're with your kids, try to be really with your kids, but don't worry so much that they're copying you. Do establish very good, clear norms, like we do not bring phones to the table ever. Doesn't matter if we need to look something up while we're talking over dinner. We'll do that after dinner. The kitchen table, no phones. Bedrooms, no phones. So if you establish spaces and times, then I think you can have a really positive impact.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Haidt, for answering these questions. I think I speak on behalf of the people in the audience, as well as those watching around the world online, when I say that this has been a very informative and helpful session. We would now like to ask Ms. Ashley Vandermeer, our assistant principal here at FIS, to say a few words before we wrap up. Ms. Vandermeer?
Thanks, Mama. So as we wrap up, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Dr. Jonathan Haidt, for not only participating in this session, but for bringing this important conversation about the anxious generation to our collective attention, our worldwide attention. Your insights, particularly on cognitive and social emotional consequences of a phone-based childhood, have really highlighted the correlation between phone use and mental health, something that I believe educational communities worldwide and families must take seriously. So at Frankfurt International School, student well-being is a strategic priority for us, and creating a phone-free environment has been an essential step in fostering that. However, this was not a reactionary decision. It was a thoughtful community-wide effort that involved parents, board members, teachers, and most importantly, our students and their families. Since implementing this policy, we've noticed a noticeable shift. More conversations in the hallway, more eye contact, and more of a sense of community amongst our students. For instance, today I saw at lunch when I was walking around, I saw a group of high school students playing Who Am I with Post-its stuck on their foreheads.
Great.
Something that I definitely haven't seen in a while unless they're forced to do that in a classroom setting. So that free choice of that play was fun. While it's still early, obviously, to measure the academic impact, we remain curious and optimistic about the long-term benefits on our school community. To schools worldwide who are considering a similar step and they're hesitating and thinking about it, I definitely would like to acknowledge that it is a challenge at the beginning, but the rewards are immense. Highlighting that heightened student engagement and well-being, it really makes it worthwhile. So I would like to add something that you had mentioned in your talk is that sense of students not having a feeling that their lives are worth something. And I think that that's a commitment that we need to make as a world community to ensure that our students feel that their lives are worth something. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our lovely student hosts, Vama Kotari and Ted Hutta, for moderating today's discussion so effectively. I also would like to thank our housemeisters who set up the stage, or for the world audience, our custodians, and to our fabulous technology team who have made the this viewing for the worldwide audience possible, and to Dr. John Switzer for organizing this event, and of course to all of you who have come in person or are joining us online wherever you are in the world. Thank you again for being part of this conversation. We hope that this conversation sparks further discussion within the international school community and what it means to be a phone-free school and what opportunities that holds. Thank you so much. We wish you a good evening, a good morning, a good rest of your day, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you.